Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending this morning, and I see more and more people keep coming in. That's good to see. Really cool. When we put these out, we didn't really expect to get the amount of attention we've gotten from these, and so really appreciate you joining today. And I know you're doing it for the content. You're not doing it for the gift card, although that's helpful. So we'll make sure we get that out to you as well too. If you joined anonymously, there's a post in the corner that I mentioned here. Send me a direct message with your name and email address. We'll make sure you get one of those gift cards. And then, moving forward, as we continue to do these webinars in the future, we won't have another one planned yet. This is the third installment of 3 that we've done. Had a little technical difficulty in the previous one, or this is the 4th one. I'm getting told it's the 4th one from the producer at the side of the show, so it's the 4th one. But we had a little technical difficulty with the last one, so we hope to revisit these kind of in a series again. So if you did miss that one as a result of that technical difficulty, our apologies there. So we'll try to get back to that one again. But just to kind of give you the idea of how this started, working at ASK and working with clients here in the area, cybersecurity education has kind of been what we've been preaching for a long time, and that's mainly because not a lot of people understand all the different angles when it comes to cybersecurity and what to do with their business. And we deal with business compromise on a pretty frequent basis. So we said, let's start with talking about kind of where did security kind of come from. We did an evolution of security webinar first, and then we talked a little bit about phishing. That's obviously a big threat vector for people. Email compromise, that's what we deal with day in and day out. Then we did cryptocurrency, so we talked a little bit about that because people don't, seem to understand that a little bit, and I frankly don't really much understand it myself sometimes. So we talked a little bit about that. We had a technical glitch there. We think we got everything resolved this time, but we'll see. So this is the final installment in the series, Combating Cyber Threats, How to Protect Your Company, and brought to you by Eric Jacobson. That's me here, and then we have Josh Gambala. Josh, welcome.
Hey, Eric. How's it going?
Very well. I see we have a lot of ASK clients attending today, which is really cool. We got some good feedback from some of the clients that we talked to on these previous webinars. Said, hey, keep these things going, and we're happy to. Just if you want to reach out to us, we'll have our email addresses. During the webinar at the end, you can send me an email, send Josh an email. Any topic you'd like to hear about. We also do a radio podcast called Bottom Line IT on the Michigan Business Network, where President of ASK Mike Maddox and I, and then sometimes Amy Mumby, who also works here at ASK, we talk about the latest in technology news. Josh then comes on and does the cybersecurity segment.
Yeah, we cover a news item.
Yep, something that's usually there's a breach in the news or a security incident in the news, and we kind of talk through that a little bit with Josh. So check that out. That's on the Michigan Business Network. I think you can get to it from our webpage. Is that correct? Yeah, I think that's good too. Yeah, at ASK, justask.net. I think we have that information up there too. So let's get into it. So a little history about us. We've had this slide up for our previous webinars, but if you're new and you're joining first time, it's our 26th year of business, which is kind of crazy. I think I've been here now 6+. And Josh, you've been here 5 years. So both Josh and I have been with the company for a good amount of time. We just moved into an elementary school here. So if you ever in the area, you want to come take a tour, we'll show you around. And then we got about 45 employees now. So I think when Josh and I were starting out with the company at about 15, so you can tell with the growth of IT services, mainly cybersecurity, security services, that there's a big issue there, right? So we need more and more people to help get companies we work with out of trouble, and also consult with them on what they're doing today and what they have in place to make sure that they have the right protections in place to help them out. So let's get right into it. I was going to do a Game of Thrones finale webcast today instead.
That'd make it very popular.
Yeah, I don't think so. Talk a little bit about what happened. Yeah. That's kind of been the big talk here. But no, we'll do the cybersecurity thing today. I think maybe we'll do the Game of Thrones thing later. But so let's talk a little bit about the agenda. As you can see here, there's common security plan misconceptions we'll talk about. That's something that Josh, you probably hear about pretty often.
Yep, definitely. The bare minimum that you can deploy in your environment, or that you should have. And when we list the bare minimum items, there's obviously some complexity to them. We're kind of looking at them from a high level, and we'll go into details.
Right. And, we're going to get pretty focused in on some solutions and some ASK solutions that we offer here. Some of our clients joining this webinar today also have these solutions in place, which is really cool. So they still join the webinar, even though they're on the latest cybersecurity solution, probably because they know from talking to either you or I that there's some tidbit in here that might also prove to be helpful. Because again, there's a lot of different facets here. You just implementing a solution is not your catch-all, but we'll talk about some of the specific solutions as we go. So common misconceptions. I mean, this is something we hear about all the time. My company's too small. I mean, here we are in Lansing. Most companies that I work with are between 20 users up to a few hundred users. And that's most of the clientele here in Lansing. We do have enterprise clients.
Sure, a lot of our security clients fit into that category.
But I just had a meeting, just yesterday, and this is not something that those guys specifically mentioned that to me in this meeting, but that's the general idea was why would we kind of be a target here, right? I mean, we only have a few people, we don't have that,
and they're not. I mean, they're targets of opportunity. In a lot of cases, the smaller organizations, it's this commodity style attacks, where they're not looking for a specific target, they're just testing as many potential targets as they can. So things like phishing emails, they're trying to get them to the widest audience possible. Things like attacks against remote access. They're just looking at the internet, trying to find that low-hanging fruit and exploit it.
And you told me the other day, I think before a meeting, that there was 12 unique phishing campaigns per day, or 13 or something like that you guys see kind of on a
we see a lot of them that actually go across industries. So we may see completely unrelated organizations receive the same phishing campaign. But we do see a lot of unique phishing campaigns, and we do see a lot of new iterations of things like the Emotet Trojan and other common maldocs come in very early.
Yeah, and so obviously email kind of a large threat vector there, when you're talking about.
It's probably the one we respond to the most.
Right. Yeah. And so compromised mailboxes, that type of thing. And then that's mainly from, like you said, they're casting wide nets here. You have the ability in today's day and age to cast that super wide net. That doesn't necessarily mean your organization is targeted. Now, and I've read a couple of reports that C-level executives are 12 times more likely to get phishing campaigns toward them, right? I mean, there
are targeted campaigns targeted by organization or by individuals and their role in the organization. But that's a small percentage of the total amount of phishing emails that we see. Most of them are just generic phishing emails looking for whoever they can get to click on them.
Yeah, and let's get back to the slide a little bit. So firewall, AV, obviously important and encouraged by us. There's some companies we still work with that don't have, firewalls in place.
We're talking dedicated
exactly
hardware firewalls at that point. We're not talking about the Comcast.
Pretty rudimentary, gateway. Right? Exactly. Right. Yeah, but at the same time, obviously that's your basic blocking and tackling, I guess you could put it. Data backup, that's super important too. A lot of folks don't understand the type of backup they have, what's being backed up. You need to engage somebody to come in there and look around and make sure we have a lot of people who are, they pay for the subscription service or file and folder level backup, and they assume that's going to be great, and I'll be just fine with that. But obviously that's not what we encourage and recommend here. And obviously use case is dependent. You could have a significant on-prem infrastructure you need an image-based backup for. You could be a really mobile workforce where you have things maybe in Microsoft Azure potentially, and there's Azure backup service. We don't need to get into that too much detail, but just saying, hey, I have a data backup and plan. And then, like you were talking about, we're talking about phishing. Security is their responsibility. So you're talking to sometimes.
This is one of the biggest things that we see is that when you talk to people, they can point to specific vendors or certain individuals within their organization where they believe that person's role includes security. But if you actually look at what that vendor does, look at what's included, or talk to that person about what they think their role includes, security usually is not included in what's being done.
Right.
And when we're talking about security in this case, we're talking about protecting your data and protecting unauthorized access, from the environment. And those are sometimes difficult concepts to separate. If you have a guy that focuses on storage, he might be trying to meet a deadline, trying to meet a specific criteria for his project, and security often becomes like a bolt-on afterwards, if at all.
Right. And in managed IT, that's what we do here at ASK. So we do managed IT services, managed security services as well. But on the managed IT side of the fence, where you initially kind of came from, Josh was kind of working as escalations came in for some of our complex technical problems, came to management here and said, look, we're not doing everything you need to do in terms of cybersecurity. He said, well, what do you mean? Josh came up with all these different areas that we needed help with, phishing, and you even did things with password cracking. You did vulnerability scanning.
Yeah, we did a lot of stuff in the past.
A lot of stuff. Yeah, right. But at the same time, kind of developed your whole team and the enhanced security services team out of that, which was 3 years ago now. I think probably somewhere in that.
Maybe, even a little longer, even
3.5 or something like that. So, when you work in managed IT and you work with a firm like ASK, you're going to get tools that are going to be, monitoring your network environment. There's going to be AV on them. There's going to be anti-malware. We're going to help you with policies and procedures. We're going to do third-party patching, Microsoft critical security patching. You're going to get all that when you work with a managed service provider. So you are getting a lot more than you typically would potentially get if you just had maybe one person taking care of your IT. Maybe that person's more of a help desk type person, and they're just doing troubleshooting, that type of thing. We see that pretty commonly. But dedicated firewall with web content filtering, and so what you're doing is you're putting that basic blocking and tackling in, which can help mitigate the cybersecurity risk that you have, and it's important. You definitely need these things in place. We talked on the last slide about backup and rapid recovery. That's something ASK calls your backup service. We call it BRR for short, backup and rapid recovery. So that's your image-based backup that saves, encrypted copies of your images of your environment. So in case you get something like ransomware that you can restore back in time, you are going to lose, a certain amount of time.
So let's stop there though, because we refer to this as block level or image backups, and there are different types of backups. So you alluded to it in the last slide. A lot of backups are just file level. So especially when you come to like client machines, they might be backing up their My Documents folder, or they might be backing up, a subset of their total data. Even things like backing up cloud solutions that they have, all of those areas have to be looked at.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. We were just talking a little bit about people in Office 365. Having your email in Office 365. A lot of companies assume that email is being backed up. Just because you have it in Microsoft's cloud, or if you have an instance in Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services, that they feel like that's secure. And it's also being backed up too, without looking into the details really about how you're just using resources and consuming resources that are in a data center.
Yeah, so let's talk about why that's important. One of the things that we frequently see with phishing emails, the way that it normally works is someone's credentials are compromised through a phishing email. An unauthorized party gains access to the email.
Yep.
And once they are in the email, they can do a couple of things. They can try to inject themselves into an existing conversation, called man in the mailbox, and or they can also try to use it for spamming. Frequently, what we'll see is they will create items and then delete them from the deleted items, or what we call purging them. Getting those back and being able to see who had the email sent to them can be very important. And there's not a direct way to do that without something like a litigation hold, or without a backup solution in place for that email, or an archival service, something like Proofpoint or Mimecast.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a pretty thorough covering of kind of bare minimum here. Will the minimum suffice, Josh?
I think we just explained it, that there's degrees of improvement over every one of those things. That yes, you could have those items in, and you may, have the solution that covers this one very specific area, but there's ways that you can improve them without a huge investment necessarily, that make them much more successful solutions.
And there's also been, technology improvements over time too on some of these tools and what the capabilities are.
Almost no one sells a dedicated antivirus anymore. They all want to be an EDR now, endpoint protection, or endpoint detection and response.
Yeah, so you start to hear that acronym a little bit more lately, EDR, and that endpoint detection response.
Right. Or MDR, managed detection and response.
Right.
Everyone likes new acronyms.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. IT. It's like, come on, we walk in here every day. We got a new acronym we got to deal with, you know. So
live security monitoring, LSM.
Well, yeah, we do that. So bringing up the slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about the cybersecurity solutions that are kind of outside of the bare minimum and items that we actually sell here at ASK that we deploy in our customer environments. And we've coined a couple different terms for them: detect and respond, live security monitoring. There's some differences between the two. Sometimes it depends on the organization, and what their employees are. If they're a mobile workforce, if they have, a lot of locations, maybe there's, certain types of applications they use. Maybe they use a lot of cloud services.
Yeah, there's not one size fits all necessarily.
Exactly. So over time, Josh and his team and the Enhanced Security Services team have looked into multitudes of different cybersecurity solutions. And I don't know if multitude is a correct.
Well, that's really where we started. We started by doing a technical review of what we currently work with. Worked with a bunch of different vendors, vetted a bunch of different solutions, tried to determine what was feasible for us to implement in our customer environments, and not just in our customer environments, but tried to find something that was scalable from the very small organizations all the way up to the larger organizations that we work with. We didn't want to exclude a specific area of our customer base either by price or by implementation.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit about detect and respond first. Live security monitoring was kind of our first foray into the cybersecurity solution with a partner company of ours that does the Security Operations Center, or SOC for short. Now it's kind of funny to say SOC, but with SIM technology, that's another acronym, SIEM, Security Incident and Event Management Technology. So you're starting to see that more and more. If you're an IT manager, IT director nowadays, you may be getting your sales staff or other people coming to you with, what are we doing for cybersecurity? Because we're trying to win this RFP or proposal, and this vendor is asking us about our cybersecurity posture. Yeah,
getting those security questionnaires from vendors as part of a vendor management program is something we work with our clients on quite frequently. And now it's very common if you are going to work with a company that is further along the lines in their security program, that they're going to be asking those questions of the vendors that they work with.
So let's talk a little bit about detect and respond. This is the solution that I mentioned. If you have a mobile workforce, you're very highly more susceptible potentially for endpoint cybersecurity threats. You're leaving your office a lot. You're going to the McDonald's. You're going to the coffee shop. What do you do to protect your machine? Right. That's detect and respond in a
so
high level.
What it is it's an endpoint detection and response program. It's a well-known branded product called SentinelOne. And then what this is a combination of both that product that does a great job of stopping execution, does all those EDR tasks, and then also includes the remediation, the triage and remediation.
So Josh,
component.
I have antivirus on my laptop.
Right.
Why do I also have detect and respond on my laptop?
So one of them is looking for these more traditional types of attacks and looking at them from the perspective of like a signature. It's not anywhere near as adaptive where it's able to necessarily identify something by the way that it behaves or the steps that it takes when it's executed.
So some of the technology nowadays, behavioral analytics, really. So they're looking at whether or not my laptop typically communicates with a server in Russia, right?
Well, right. That can be one thing that they can look at.
And maybe mine does, because I'm streaming, illegitimate Game of Thrones from Russian servers. But
it could also be something more complex, like what the ID is of the parent process. If they don't expect that type of application to have that.
Right.
There's or other back-end activities that it might be taking place. So one thing, let's use Maldocs as the example again because they're so prevalent. It's common for Maldocs to call a command prompt, and then from that command prompt to execute something. Well, really, Word documents and Excel documents shouldn't be calling command prompts, and should not be progressing to run PowerShell and then downloading payloads and executing payloads. So that first step where the Word document calls that command prompt is a good example of an unexpected behavior.
So we have clients today that already have a tool on their workstations and on their servers that helps us do the 24/7 monitoring, and it has antivirus and has all those other protections.
Right, an RMM.
an RMM tool, remote monitoring and management tool. And so if you are currently an ASK client or a managed services client who might have the same tool that we use, this is something you can flip on for your highly susceptible users right now. So you can have your executives who are more prone to maybe getting cybersecurity threats, toward them, your server environment. So with this tool, it gives us the ability to actually go in and not only alert on those things like you talked about from the behavioral standpoint, but then go in and remediate things like ransomware and create a secure connection right to that machine to clean up that potential infection.
Right. It's all of those aspects of it put together. Okay. You still get all the great things that SentinelOne does, pre-execution detection and all of the EDR portion of it, and then the triage that takes place, and the security operations center that monitors it, the notifications. It's basically a bundled
when
solution.
Some of my clients clicked on some stuff they're not supposed to click on,
right?
We went out and we flipped this on because this is going to help mitigate the spread of potentially, lateral moving, ransomware, things like that too. Because, well, in a sense,
some off-label uses have occurred, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is kind of our fallback to, hey, if your AV has missed it, or if you haven't patched correctly, you'll want to deploy this in place as well too. And then we get the security operations center involved, and then we have folks who can come in and remediate the issue who have experienced that's a human component. So moving on from there, we have kind of what we started with, which is a solution you sourced originally from a partner company we call Live Security Monitoring. This is a different security solution. There's a lot of same elements into it, but there's a little difference. And I think the biggest difference to me, and listen, you correct me if I'm wrong here, because you guys on the technical side like to do that to the sales guys. So the biggest difference I've heard is if you're an organization out there and you're interested in protecting your network from the network level, okay, and you have potentially Internet of Things devices, so things that are communicating to the internet that are not necessarily like Windows operating systems, right? Am I losing track? Okay, well, right. Hold on. I was going to say this solution can pick up those anomalous types of activities even on Windows operating systems types of machines that are inside of a network environment.
So you can look at the monitoring from...
I'm going to think that I was exactly correct on that.
Sure. From two different perspectives. So endpoints can be monitored, and then you have devices that don't necessarily support normal endpoint monitoring. Things like you mentioned, like IoT devices, other pieces of hardware where you're not going to go and install a piece of software like an endpoint protection or an AV or an anti-malware on them. Those integrated devices that do things like industrial controls and things like that may not be running normal endpoint software. So you have to try to detect when they do something that's abnormal or bad another way. In this case, what we're talking about is monitoring network traffic. Things like communicating with known malicious domains, or even something like downloading a piece of software from that may be malicious. And there's a bunch of different things that you can look at that aren't necessarily just those normal endpoint detections. Office 365 monitoring. You're monitoring a cloud solution that way by ingesting its logs and comparing them against what's normal.
So basically, you got your network devices, any kind of device that communicates through the internet, it spits out a bunch of logs.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure. Yeah, and generates network traffic and everything else.
And so the way you find out if something's a little different than normal is someone correlates the logs.
Yeah, log correlation, and then also comparing it against a known good kind of baseline.
Right. So we have an organization in the back end who's getting that known good baseline by security news and feeds, and updates it to the latest.
Well, and just your environment, actually.
In the client environment, right? And so they're taking all that data, compiling it, and they're putting it into machine learning, like in Amazon Web Services and Amazon's cloud, and in this case specifically Amazon's cloud. Mm-hmm. And they're taking all that information and they are then saying, hey, Mr. Security Researcher, something's up with this environment. You got to do something. You got to alert on this because this is not normal. This is something outside the ordinary. alert the client.
Yeah, they're doing exactly what you would do if you had a staff internally that was doing this. Is they are taking and eliminating what is known to be good and distilling that down to what is either unknown or what is known to be bad, and then using that to actually communicate actionable items to you, so that you're not necessarily trying to filter through everything.
Okay, so let's take a quick little pause here, see if we got any questions here. We got some snarky comments here. We got, you know who you are. So let's take a quick glance here, see if we got anything.
So yeah, I mean, there's one comment. So visibility is the key to everything security. Yes, that's right. If you know specifically what you're looking for, if you have millions and millions of log lines that you haven't been able to filter out content from, it can be very difficult to use what you have. So I would say yes, visibility is incredibly important, but knowing what you're looking for and being able to distill that down to a usable subset of that data is critically important also.
Got a question: laptops versus iPads, just tablets versus,
Okay, so for us, in most cases, iPads fall into the category of devices that we'd like to see more like network traffic based telemetry for versus the endpoint. There are AVs that you can run on iOS and other solutions. We haven't really found good ways to integrate most of them. What do we think of CrowdStrike? Yeah, CrowdStrike is a good company. Their products are good. Their endpoint protection or endpoint detection and response is on par with a lot of.
That's why I think we competed. Obviously, we compete sometimes against CrowdStrike when we
CrowdStrike, Carbon Black.
Yep, and we're talking about live security monitoring and things like that. So we have to educate our end users kind of on those differences and what makes the most sense for their business in that respect. So with live security monitoring, if you have those other types of entanglements, like those machines that communicate to the internet, well, you can't put a CrowdStrike tool on that machine necessarily, right? Is that
well for some of them, yeah. But I think the most important distinction between this is that CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, all those EDRs and endpoint protections, those are all what we consider a log source. They generate log data. None of those ingest logs. Well, the solutions that we commonly recommend for more advanced security programs are going to be something that is able to take all of these different applications and all of these different log sources and put them together and filter them, and provide you with that intelligence.
And then we have a question here too on north-south, east-west traffic, and just for our listeners out there, north-south through the internet, through the firewall, back and forth through the network. So your own network to the internet, that's your north-south, and then what people refer to as east-west is inside your own network environment, modifications,
communication
changes
between devices,
communications between devices, and so we hear this a lot, right? We actually had a client at one point, well, not a client, a prospect at one point in time, because they never signed up with a security solution, but said, look, we only are interested in east-west traffic monitoring.
Yeah.
We only want to do east. So how does this live security monitoring stack up? Is that something we can do with that? And your answer to that was a lot more nuanced than you might expect. It's not like a yes/no answer. Mm-hmm. In Josh's opinion, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this one, you mentioned in many cases, if you're monitoring for north-south traffic, that is essentially also capturing east-west depending on your client situation. So they were hoping that there was like information being stolen maybe from a different part of the world.
Insider threat, yeah.
Insider threat. But you said, well, in most cases, in insider threats, usually those people post that information into things like Pastebin.
They have to get it out of, or they have to get into the network, whether they're coming in over their corporate VPN, et cetera, or using someone else's, be in the environment already, like a normal insider threat. They have to be able to get the data out of the environment. And really, when it comes down to it, if you want to do something like just copy data, you can use a cell phone to take pictures of it. So there are good ways of monitoring east-west traffic, but most of the time, and I know that this is that I'm kind of hedging the most.
Just give us a straight answer, Josh.
Most frequently, we see detections on north-south, and we try to detect them at the point where where the environment is being compromised, not at the point where it's post-exploitation. We want to catch it as early as possible.
Well, and again, there is nuance to it. There is based on the organizations that you're working with and what makes the most sense for them and a security.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, we ship Josh out to a client site or prospective client site to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. I mean, that's kind of one of the core things we do here to kind of get a good idea how the business operates, how they function, where your threat vectors might be. But there's a lot of commonality, obviously. You want to have end user training, you want to have a cybersecurity solution, and you want to have those basic, we call them the 3 pillars here. So you have your backup, you have your basic, managed IT type of an approach that, an individual IT person can deploy. And then you have your cybersecurity solution and tool. In many cases, 2 of those, well, actually 3 of those things are usually managed sometimes by third parties because, you don't have that much bandwidth to be able to do all those things. You have to have multiple people on your IT staff. So, we work with, when it comes to like live security monitoring, some companies that have 10, 15 people on their IT staff, but they don't have any security analysts. I mean, that's what that solution is geared for. It's the managed security side of things too. And then also in the smaller business, you have people going, well, I put my firewall on, I put an AV in, but they're not looking at logs from any sources, even if they deployed something like CrowdStrike or
not not looking at them in real time. It takes a lot of people in order to monitor an environment 24 hours a day. And actually be actively monitoring what's taking place. You can just rely on notifications, but that can get old, especially for a one-man operation. Unless you have quieted down like a SIM product to the point where it's not causing alert fatigue, and then the question is, have you quieted it down to the point where you're missing things? So there's a lot of back and forth, and we've looked at other products. I see someone mentioned Alien Vault. That's now AT&T Security, I believe, is what they're.
Really?
So yeah, they bought Alien Vault. And there's nothing wrong with Alien Vault as a product. The problem is that it's kind of falls into what we call a hybrid solution, where you need bodies, you need people that can monitor it. You also need to maintain it. There's a lot to that, and we ran it in-house here for a while, and ended up going with a solution where the SOC was out of the equation, where it was being staffed.
So let's get back a little bit to what the small business and most of our clients here, most of the attendees on this call would be considered, what you need.
Right.
And a lot of this, again, I mean, boils back to some of these basic policies too that a lot of businesses don't have. They don't have these policies written. I've been just approached recently from a prospective client of ours to say, hey, can you help us write some of these policies? And we said, well, kind of, sort of. We'll talk more about that, but some of the things we have templates for. We have already kind of outlined what some of these basic policies should be in an environment.
Yeah, you can cut and paste out of them. I mean, we've had them vetted. You can use them to build out your own. But I think the basics. I mean, what you really have to have. The 3 that everyone should have: an acceptable use policy, an incident response plan, and a disaster recovery plan. Acceptable use policy. There's some commonly considered items that you should have included in it. You can see them all listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them one by one. Incident response plan. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I just want to say, because we broadcast a show from our sister company, Elevate Marketing Company. They help us out here. We get this thing, we get the nice office to broadcast this webinar from. And they were telling us a story on social media policy, which is, a lot of people in the company and, marketing and sales functions have access to the social media sites, and they use their credentials in there too.
A shared account.
And they never are kind of like under the umbrella of the IT department and putting security standards in place. So we've seen, I've heard about accounts that like whole Pinterest accounts being compromised from businesses, all that information, all that time spent just going to complete, disappear.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point that out because a lot of businesses, spending a lot of money on digital marketing, social media marketing, and those credentials sometimes reside in people's hands like me, who I told you about a long time ago. I said, like, I have access to the ASK Facebook and Twitter page and all that. And if someone said, yeah, you shouldn't have that really, at the end of the day, or at least adopt some level of, two-factor, deploy that.
Sure.
Things along those lines. I just wanted to bring that up because not a lot of people talk about that.
So what I like about
two-factor
on social media is that it usually forces something else that we like to see, and that's one user, one account. We like to see where users don't have shared accounts, and that includes for social platforms or anything else. One user, one account allows for you to establish non-repudiation, basically being able to definitively identify who did what and when. And you lose that as soon as you start sharing those usernames and passwords.
Right.
Multi-factor is pretty hard to do on shared accounts. So a lot of the times it'll force that. Incident response plan, you can keep it simple.
Well,
you don't have to make a complex one.
One thought too, and if the listeners are out there, feel free to when we get our emails up here, email us on the show. But we do work with a law firm in town, and we work with he's a younger guy. He's in cybersecurity. Might bring him on to a future webinar to talk about the legal side of what happens next. And because that was key for us, early on, we didn't really quite know the process of establishing like attorney-client privilege immediately, and then how does that work from a forensic standpoint to go back and do some work there, because that's what a lot of businesses are faced with right now. It's dealing with the insurance companies because they might have a cyber liability insurance policy, talking to their legal team, paying exorbitant legal fees in many cases because their legal team is starting to engage people maybe not necessarily in the best way forward. So there's a whole other element to this
I think
that happens after the fact.
Yeah, and I think you could probably distill it down to a couple specific areas. So for an incident response plan, you want to know, who's communicating with whom and at what point. You want to have the basics for what you're going to do and what you're going to contact a third party for. And you also want to have a plan in place to control the message. So I think this moves into the next one. Do people know who to send a reported incident to? This is something we've been dealing with a lot lately. For instance, if one of our clients receives a phishing email and they receive it from a legitimate company, we've identified that it's not spoofed, and we know that that person has a business email compromise. We may want to contact them and say, hey, so you're aware you have this issue going on in your environment. And the problem is 90% of the time when we get to someone at the organization, they don't know who to send us to. They don't have the knowledge of who we're going to communicate with, or even worse, they say, "Oh, we've been hacked." Don't say that. Don't be in a place where your reception or your or someone that's doing your public social media where they're the one that is controlling the message regarding a potential
hey, we're
incident.
Sorry, our phones aren't working right now. We've been hacked, on the company Facebook page.
Don't be that company. Make sure that you've trained these people ahead of time and that you have the ability to control that.
And then disaster recovery plan, we've talked about having, when we worked with our clients about coming up with an incident response plan, they actually would say that, you'd save that plan like on a removable media. So like a thumb drive, and you have that in a safe.
So you have access to it, not on your server.
Right, exactly. Because if you had it in your server and you have a cybersecurity incident, and you can't access your incident response plan.
I would say go one step further. Not only have a disaster recovery plan, but make sure that it's a document that gets updated, and that you're actually testing that the steps that are outlined in it are something that you can follow and actually use for recovery purposes.
So let's take a quick look here if we have any other additional questions. Looks like we don't at this time. And let's see what we got coming up. Honestly, I think this might be down to the procedures here, and I think that might be.
That was
a previous question.
Forescout. Forescout is a NAC company, network access and control. So that's really beyond the scope of where we're at with this, but it's definitely something we can talk about further if you're working on trying to do the CIS or SANS 20 critical security controls, or working on NIST or one of those compliance.
So just again, some kind of reiterating some of the previous slide procedures. You have your incident response plan. Who do you send the incident to? The disaster recovery plan. Where your data is, where your logs are. And then you want to touch a little bit on this malware.
This is one of the biggest problems we have when we're doing incident response, is that people have insufficient logging. We have to find where their logs are if they do have logs, and they don't know where all their data is. Specifically, the items that we're most concerned with are things like either proprietary data or PII, PHI, so personally identifiable information, protected health information. You should know where all those are. You should know what logging is enabled on those, and then just generic help with logging. If you want to see what the recommendations are for what type of logging you should be doing, everything from, audit logging and down from there, malwarearchaeology.com/cheat sheets. It has, logging configurations for a lot of different things. It's something you should definitely look into. By default, Windows logging is pretty inept. If you just have the default logging, it's not great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's almost like I just want to point out too. We talked a little bit about Office 365 earlier, kind of a common, email platform right now for hosted Exchange. When you deploy that, or you migrate to an Office 365 environment, Microsoft has a score system in for your Office 365 that does tell you whether or not you are adapting it, like was it a 1,000-point scale? I think it's something like that, or
I think it's right around. I think it's between 700 and 800 points, and most organizations want to be in the like 550.
Yeah,
range.
so you can go inside your admin portal there, and you can find the score, and then it gives you the tips to improve the score. And then when you just migrate out of the box, you're like 150.
Yeah, 200. Yeah.
Which is well below what even Microsoft would say you should be.
There's definitely some good information in it. I mean, you obviously have to filter it out, but there is some.
So just kind of finishing up here today, minimal attack surface, that's key. We've run into open RDP, so people
no more open RDP anymore. It's got to go away.
Brute forced pretty consistently throughout the internet. So if you in your organization have people who have remoted in, from their home office, using the
off the open internet.
That's a bad thing. Yeah. Only host when you have to. Yeah,
I mean, if you're doing something like hosting an IIS server and it's just a minimalist flat website and doesn't have any back-end complexity, stop doing that. Use a web hosting service. Get that out of your environment and make someone else responsible for the maintenance and patching. Yeah. If you're contracting someone to do it, don't forget that just having someone do the web design for it does not maintain the actual underlying operating system, and you need someone to be doing that too. DVRs don't need to be public. I can't tell you how many of these we still find DVRs just stuck on the public internet. Not only are they really bad from an operational security perspective, I shouldn't be able to see whether there's anyone in your building and what doors are closest to what assets I want. But they're also frequently used to do malicious things. Anything that you have that's internal in your environment that you want to stick on the public internet, it should be isolated, something like a DMZ, additional restrictions on that, locked down as much as possible, and it should really be monitored. The goal is to have the lowest dwell time possible when something inevitably happens to that asset.
So if you're interested in getting started and talking a little bit more about those types of solutions, detect and respond, live security monitoring, reach out to us. Eric, that's me. I have my email address here, Josh. And same thing about webinar topics. I mean, we want to educate our current client base. If you have people and you work with or family members that want to attend this thing too, and moving forward, we have some things that are of interest, and you like what you heard today, send it along. I mean, this is not just for ASK clients. I mean, obviously a lot of clients have joined this because I know them, I work with them. You've worked with a lot of our clients. They want to hear some of this stuff. Some of them are on the fence about things like live security monitoring, detect and respond. So that's why we want to put these things out for education. And we have some prospects on this call too who we've talked to about security. And the key here is minimizing that threat landscape, potentially doing a cybersecurity risk assessment, find out where things are at. End user education. The type of expense you're looking at for a solution like detect and respond is relatively minimal for a machine if you're already a managed services client of ASK. So that's an easy. Let's add that to the program, because then you're getting a security operations center who can go in and remediate issues for you as well too. Live security monitoring, we kind of look for you're kind of in that ballpark of about $800 to $900 a month on the low end and the very low end based on your business size. So that's how much that type of solution costs. But you are, in a sense, getting a whole team of managed security service professionals in there. And I just talked to a client who just spent $40,000 on legal fees because of a result of a security incident he has had. I had another client spent $16,000 on a ransomware incident. Yep. So these are things that and I say client kind of just in the sake they call me. A lot of our legal friends refer these businesses to us after the fact. But let me just leave with one key point here. we have a number of clients on our live security monitoring solution right now. That's that kind of Apex solution who are getting that security operations center. Almost all of them have put it in after they've had an incident. And that's what kind of triggered the, yep, okay, it makes sense to put this in now. I think all but maybe what, 2? I think maybe
Well,
out of the.
I really think that the bigger thing is that most of them have had pressure from the companies that they provide service to. You know, it's becoming more and more prevalent that your security that's in place is going to have to match that of the companies you're providing service to. So if you're still at the beginning of this, of getting your security going internally, you need to be cognizant of the size of companies that you're working with, because at some point you're going to have a equal to what they have, because they're not going to want to trust you with their data otherwise. So it's only a matter of time before, if you ignore the actual internal risk and just look at it from a business perspective, if you want to keep doing business, at a high level, you're going to have to do something.
Right. So, yeah. In closing, thanks for joining again, and we'll keep you updated. If you've joined this webinar, we have your email address. We'll send this out to you for upcoming webinars. And if you don't want to be in the list, just let us know. But that's how we'll reach you guys. But we'll post things on our Facebook page about upcoming webinars. I think that's where you could find information like about this one that we had coming up. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email Josh and I, and we can help you out and help your business out. So
thanks, Elevate.
Thanks, Elevate, for hosting. And, you guys need any marketing work, they're fantastic. They do ASK marketing. Just a quick plug for them. But thanks, everybody. And we will see you at a future webinar. Right, Josh?
Have a great holiday weekend.